embodiment on a planet like this is that you are expressing who you are, and you are being non-attached to the outer results, to the fruits of action, because you find joy in just expressing your higher being. That is the higher potential of your divine plan. There is, of course, a work phase where you may have to do certain things, have relationships with certain people, do certain things on the outer, go through certain experiences. And many of you have already sensed this. Intuitively, you have already done it. But what we seek to help you get to is the point where you can go into the higher phase of your divine plan, the creative phase, and where you can begin to give your gift and express yourself, the highest potential that you wanted to express before you came into embodiment, based on that higher level of consciousness that you have the potential to reach. And that can become a positive spiral where you are at peace with being an embodiment. You don't have a deficit attitude that you're always behind, you should always be somewhere else. There's always something you should have done that you haven't done. There's more you could do. But instead, you are at peace with being who you are, knowing that you will continue to take step by step and come up higher for the rest of this lifetime. You will get more and more comfortable, more and more creative in expressing your creativity, and more peaceful in enjoying the process of seeing your life unfold. This is the state we want you to reach, because that is when you can actually enjoy being on this planet. And my beloved, why wouldn't we want you to enjoy being an embodiment? I will tell you that there is a considerable number of ascended masters who have ascended from Earth and who have looked back to the process of being an embodiment, going into whatever downward spirals we went into, and then gradually, slowly climbing out of them and coming to the point of qualifying for our ascension. And we look back at this process and we can see that we actually wish that we could have taken some more time in embodiment to actually enjoy being on this planet. We can also be realistic and see that times were different back then. The consciousness, the collective consciousness was denser, and therefore there was in some cases more of an urgency that we ascend at a certain time for a variety of reasons, and so there simply wasn't the time to enjoy this. But you can see how in Jesus' case he ascended in a physical way shortly after the completion of his public mission, but then he was given dispensation to materialize another body and live in that body until the age of 81, and then go through his final spiritual ascension at that time. And in those years where he was living in Kashmir, he did enjoy being in embodiment, even with the density that the planet had at the time. You will also see that in my last embodiment, including with Kuthumi, we also had some time, we had a certain spiritual attainment and non-attachment that we were actually able to enjoy being in embodiment at the time. This is not something that has really been emphasized in previous Ascended Master dispensations, but it is the case. We had that time, and so the result of having this time is that you can actually come to a point where you are completely at peace with being here, but you're also at peace with ascending. Whereas if you have a more rushed time schedule, you often don't come to the point where you're at peace with being on Earth, and therefore you can almost come to the point where you have qualified for your ascension, but you're not quite at peace with ascending. And so you must actually spend some time resolving that last sense of unpeace before you are really at the point where you can completely leave the earth behind and move into the ascended state. And so, naturally, we would like those of you who have the potential to ascend after this lifetime to come to this point where you can be at peace, you can enjoy being here, and you can therefore set an example that spiritual people can be at peace, can enjoy life. They don't have to withdraw from life, live in a cave. They don't have to live a certain strict, regimented life. They can actually enjoy life and express that joy, and then they can be at peace with moving on. And this is for those of you who have the potential to ascend after this lifetime. These are the higher levels of your divine plan. And so this can, for some of you, require a conscious shift in awareness, where you actually see this. But in order to see it, you may have to be willing to look at some of your attitudes to what it means to be a spiritual person and ascended master student, what it means to reach a higher level of consciousness, what it means to express your Christhood or manifest Buddhahood, because you need to do away with some of these past images that have been created of how a spiritual person is supposed to behave in a certain way. This you need to recognize here, as Mother Mary said, your divine plan is completely individual. There is no way you can look at the past and look at how other spiritual people reacted in the past and say, oh, this has set the mold for how we should all be in the future. Jesus went through what he went through 2,000 years ago at the beginning of the age of Pisces. You are now at the beginning of the age of Aquarius. You are not going to qualify for your ascension by doing exactly what Jesus did, because the consciousness has shifted, the requirements are different. So, this is all incorporated in your divine plan. You looked at the time you are going to embody in, you looked at your consciousness, and you mapped this out, and it is, you have the potential. If you have the potential to ascend after this lifetime, you also have the potential to gradually come to see your divine plan and how to express your Christhood. And I'm simply saying that in order to do this, you have to stop having some kind of standard for how you think you should behave, what you think you should do or not do. Again, this is not a matter of saying that you can do anything you want and nothing is wrong or nothing is unspiritual, but it is a matter of saying, I am not going to follow the standards in the world, the standards of the fallen beings, the standards of the mass consciousness, or even the standards that I have created so far in this embodiment. I'm going to look at what was it I incorporated in my divine plan that I chose from a higher awareness. I'm going to pull that into my conscious awareness, and I'm going to dare to be that way, to be the way I wanted to be before coming into embodiment. Not the way other people or the fallen beings want to be, or not the way my separate selves want me to be. So, in a sense, this is not necessarily a goal that you can manifest in a short period of time, because, as Mother Mary said, it's a gradual process of step by step coming to this higher awareness. And for many of you, it will not come to you until later in life. And it is important that you don't panic about this and that you don't get into this pattern of setting a timetable for yourself. Because truly, my beloved, when you come to the higher states of consciousness towards the 144th level, when you can come to the point of beginning to make peace, then time stops being linear. And all of a sudden, as the Buddha has said, time is not. Because even if you came to the point of being completely at peace with being an embodiment a week before you actually laid the body off and ascended, in that week you could still radiate so much light into the collective consciousness that you could fulfill the goal of your divine plan. So you see how the linear mind always wants to do what the linear mind wants to do. And when you get the concept of a divine plan, that you have a goal, then the linear mind wants to say, yes, but this goal is far beyond me, so I have to really work hard, I have to set a timetable, I have to get to this point, I have to get to that point before next week, and I have to rise so high within the next year, and so forth and so on. And so people can start in their minds creating these elaborate structures, and it just works against the whole process, because it suddenly turns it into a linear process, whereas what we are trying to tell you now several times is that it is actually a spherical, intuitive, experiential process. It's not a matter of understanding and planning and deciding with the outer mind. It's a matter of transcending the outer mind and having those experiences that are not linear, not analytical, not based on the outer mind. It is not something the outer mind can grasp. It is often so that when you come to have an insight of this is the next step in my divine plan, you cannot explain it to others, you cannot justify it, you cannot give a reason for it, even to yourself. You just know that this is the next step, and this is what I'm doing. And so you learn to flow, and this is what we have called flowing with the river of life, where when you get an insight, there's no need to justify it, but also there's no opposition to implementing it. You just flow into it. And therefore, you don't need to plan ahead. Many times it's just a spontaneous insight is there, and you right away flow into bringing it into manifestation. And so, linearity can be helpful at a certain level of the path. But there comes a point on the path where the gap between where you are and the ascended state cannot be crossed through a linear process. It is still gradual, it is still step by step, but it's not a linear process where you can sit with the analytical mind and map out, this is how I get from the 132nd to the 133rd level and all the way up to the 144th. It is much more spherical, much more intuitive, and that's why there comes that point where you have to begin to see the limitations of the linear mind, you have to begin to neutralize it consciously, separate yourself from it, and realize that the linear mind is a tool. There's nothing wrong with it inherently. It is a tool much like the physical body. The physical body is your vehicle for interacting with Earth, so is the linear mind. But you don't let the limitations of the physical body determine what you can do spiritually in terms of growing in consciousness. And the same with the linear mind. You don't let it limit you. And therefore you have to come to that conscious awareness and conscious decision that you will accelerate yourself beyond the linear mind, you will stop identifying with it, you will realize that the linear mind will always do what it does, it will always compare, it will always analyze, it will always label. And in many cases, you simply don't pay attention to it. You let it do its work, but you just ignore it, because you are looking for that spherical insight that might resolve any paradox or contradiction that the linear mind can come up with. And you are also neutralizing the linear mind's desire to plan the rest of your life in minute detail, and you are willing to just flow with it, trusting that as you apply yourself, as you heal your psychology, open your mind to insight, you will get those insights. And when you have them, you will spontaneously implement them. And so, I have said more than I wanted to say, which of course is my nature and my joy. And so, even though I could go on and say much more, I will recognize the limitations of the material, the physical octave, and thank you for being willing to experience my presence, and to allow me to experience your presences. Because it is my joy to interact with you. As Mother Mary said, we accept each one of you unconditionally, and I do not want to in any way get you the expression that you might have from previous dispensations, that I am the strict disciplinarian who sets conditions for when I will deal with you, that you have to come up to a certain level. Those of you who are open to these teachings, it is a joy for me to interact with you regardless of how you see yourself. And so again, my desire is that you could see yourself as I see you. That would be the gift I would be willing to give you. And if you are open and willing, I may indeed be able to give you a glimpse of how I see you if you give me a moment of your attention.